I think a lot of my racial identity and the way that I identify myself comes from these two people. These are my grandparents. On the left is my grandfather, Robert Mikesell, and on the right is my grandmother, Yukari Marimoto. My grandparents got married in 1956, and at the time that they got married, it was illegal for them to get married in Utah, the state that they were living in, because of anti-miscegenation laws. So they hit the road and actually drove through four different states before they could find someone who would marry them. And they finally settled in California because that was the state that would marry them. I think this was really influential on my growing up because I grew up aware of the fact that there were laws that prevented people of different races from getting married. And I was really aware of the kind of discrimination that people in the past had faced because of my grandparents' experience. Also, my dad being of mixed race in the 50s and 60s, growing up, they lived in Colorado and also in upstate New York, and those weren't the most accepting or diverse communities that he lived in. So, him and his siblings had a lot of stories about facing different racial discrimination because of being mixed race at the time. These are my great grandparents. That's my great grandmother Asako, and my great grandfather Masaichiro, and that is his passport photo from when he emigrated to the United States. They lived in California, and that's where they had their kids. And during World War II, they were forced to relocate to Utah. They were able to avoid internment camps because my great grandfather had a sponsor in Utah who was willing to give him a job, so they didn't have to go to the camps. But they did end up spending their first winter and living in a tent in Utah with five children. And my grandmother can remember that when they left their house in California, they lost everything, and every kid was allowed to bring one toy. So she had one specific toy that she still has that was the toy that she was allowed to bring. And they lost everything that they couldn't carry. At the same time, my great grandmother is from Hiroshima, so while she was being relocated and being forced to live in Utah in this tent, um, her almost her entire family died in the bomb. And I think that their stories of immigration and the way that they were treated by the government has really shaped my feelings about social justice and about civil rights. Obviously, their civil rights were violated by our government, and they faced systemic discrimination because of their race and their immigration status. And that's something that has really made a big impact on me, and I think has really influenced how I approach education, the communities that I choose to work in, and the way that I choose to teach my subject matter. This is a picture of me. I'm the little one in the kimono with my grandmother. She's the one in the red. And then my two aunts and my great grandmother's in the middle, Asako. And then on the far left, that's my mom and my brother. You can see just by looking at this picture that my upbringing was kind of a funny meeting of the worlds. We had a lot of Japanese culture in our family, but then, as you can see, my mom is a 5'10" redhead, and my brother came out looking exactly like her. So I had a lot of ways that I was kind of in between cultures growing up. I had a very American, suburban upbringing in some ways, but I had this extended Japanese family that brought in all of this other culture. These are some more pictures of me. That's my mom and my brother. They're the ones with the red hair. And then you can see my dad holding me when I was a little baby. When we were out in public, I used to get asked a lot if I was adopted, which, I mean, seems like a really personal question to ask someone in the grocery store, but people would ask my mom all the time when I was little if I was adopted because she would be out with my brother and I, and obviously my brother and I don't look a lot alike. It also has made it was really interesting just the way that we looked on the outside, how differently my brother and I looked on the outside, despite the fact that we have the same heritage, the same parents. Um, we've had really different experiences. I mean, my brother has grown up, for all intents and purposes, a white male in society's eyes, and I grew up as a definitely not white female. A lot of people were confused about what I was. I got asked a lot, "What am I?" And, "Oh, you're so exotic." Um, but my brother never really had those experiences. So it's really interesting the different ways that society has viewed us and kind of the different experiences that we've had because of the way that we look on the outside. These are some pictures of a lot of my cousins. Some of my cousins are full Japanese, but a lot of my Japanese cousins have married other people. So some of the kids in this picture are Japanese. Some are Japanese and white. Some are Japanese and Vietnamese. Some are Japanese and African American. We have a really big melting pot in our family, and there's a lot of different cultures that are represented when our family gets together with that kind of underpinning of our Japanese heritage from my great grandparents. I think that nowadays, the thing that I think about the most is really how this all affects my daughter. My husband, who you can see there, he is half Cuban and half Salvadorian. I am Japanese and white, so I have a Japanese, white, Cuban, Salvadorian daughter. And I really think about kind of her position. I think that she's, very classically American. She's kind of the story of American immigration. We can, on my grandfather's side, trace our roots back all the way to the American Revolution, to the first people who came to this country, and then kind of subsequent waves of immigration she can trace through her own heritage. And it makes me really think about the schools that I want to put her in, the places that I want to live. She's very American, she's very Californian, but I think in a lot of places she would be seen as very different and the other. And so it really has made me think about where I choose to live, the communities I choose to live in, the people I choose to be friends with and interact with and invite into my family. Because I know that for me growing up, being someone who was kind of caught in between worlds when I lived in a very white suburban community, there were times that it was awkward and uncomfortable. And I don't want to shelter her from that because that is the real world, and she will grow up hearing all the same stories that I did about the ways that discrimination are systematized in the United States and the way that the government uses its power to discriminate against certain people. But at the same time, I want to protect her from as much of the negative aspects of that as I can. I think that my family is a very American family, and that we represent kind of the best about this country and the way that different cultures can come together and can meet. And yeah, I really appreciate the upbringing that I had, both the amount that I was exposed to the way that the systems work, and then also the rich cultural diversity that came into my life because of being born into the family that I was born in and the many different cultures that are represented there.